take a little time. We decided that we would do this meeting at this point in the year, partly because there's so much going on still at the State House and things hanging in the balance at the end of the legislative session, and you're going to hear a ton about that. But the other thing that's going to happen between now and when we meet again is a bunch of elections are going to take shape. So I wanted to take a few minutes just to talk about that in general, and give some examples of ways that everybody in this room can make a difference through the election cycle that's basically already starting and is going to be happening between now and November. And so Justin's going to have to help me with the slides. So here's my proposition: in order to resist hate, we need to win some elections. So next. I see us as fundamentally caught in this weird place where we're always having to answer the question of what kind of state is Rhode Island. And you hear a lot, at least I hear a lot, people are like, well, Rhode Island is really, it's a very conservative state. Like it's a democratic state, but it's a conservative state. I don't think that's true, and I think the evidence is on my side there, but we do have this very big problem, if you want to go to the next slide, where our politics and our government is fundamentally disconnected from what people want. And keep going. But the good news is voters overwhelmingly share our values, and there are a bunch of things here. Let's just go through them. The first is, you can't read that probably, but that's the number of the percentage of Rhode Islanders in the general electorate, so Democrats, Independents, and Republicans, that support the assault weapons ban. Next. This is a woman's right to choose. Pretty big majority. That's the $15 an hour minimum wage. Next. That's taxing the rich to pay for important government services, even more popular than all of those things in Rhode Island. And next. This is earned sick days from last year. Almost 90% of Rhode Islanders support that. So if this is the case, why is it so challenging to make any of these things law in Rhode Island? I think many of you know we worked really hard with a lot of you to make earned sick days law last year. It was really difficult, even though almost 90% of voters support it. So go to the next slide here. So here's an example of how far out of step from where voters are our government is on average. This is state representative districts. The blue ones are ones that are endorsed by Planned Parenthood. The red ones are places where someone's been endorsed by Right to Life. You'll see this does not at all look like a state where a big majority of people are pro-choice, right? So we have a big disconnect in Rhode Island between what voters want and what all of us want, and what's actually represented in our government. I think of this as we have a vicious cycle that keeps our values out of government. And it's long in the making. Conservatives, and I don't mean here like, people who are just sort of like old school in their values. I mean like conservatives for 30 years have been plotting to make it this way. Next, they've been blaming government for all problems, right? You guys have heard this. You know, the Grover Norquist thing, I want government so small I can drown it in a bathtub. We've heard a lot about how terrible government is. That is part of this problem. Government is seen as dysfunctional. Now, government sometimes is dysfunctional too, but it becomes a mantra that doesn't matter. All of government is corrupt. It can't possibly matter. Next. Then we have good people tuning out. That's on purpose. There's been a long campaign to get people to tune out. And next, when good people turn out, good people do not run for, win, and serve in public office, and therefore government is even less responsive than it was contributing to the cycle again, right? At Working Families, and I think all of you are about reversing this, or breaking this cycle and creating a new one. So next slide. The new cycle starts in a different place. It starts really in a very resist hate kind of place. It starts with good people tuning in. And the next step, which is what I'm talking about today, is good people run for and win public office, right? So today we're mostly in this arrow between these two. We've got lots of people who, since the election in 2016, have said, okay, wait a second, I am now paying attention to what is going on in government here. And we hope that that means that 2018 is a good year for people running for, winning, and then serving in public office. And if we do that next, government will be more responsive. It matters quite a bit, by the way. I have said this often, certainly this has been my experience, is that as good people run for and win elections, not only do you have those folks up there, but the fact that they ran and won is something the rest of the political class pays attention to. And they're like, wait a second, people who believe in all these things that I previously thought were weird and lefty are winning elections. That might mean something about what's possible and what's important in our state today. So government becomes more responsive, government makes more of a positive difference. Hopefully it's then seen as more important and more people tune in. So we have, go to the next slide briefly. Just a quick example. That's on the top, that picture is the picture of our first Resist Hate meeting, a really fabulous example of good people tuning in. Next is, you see Marcia Rangland Vassell, one of the great candidates who ran for and won public office 2 years ago. And then those elections and the people who won in that cycle were critically important to making earned sick days a priority in the State House. This is that law actually being passed, and we hope that all of that, as that comes into effect, begins to have the impact of people saying, you know what, actually, like some of this government stuff is working for me in ways that I can see as different. Okay, go forward. I think there are some arrows that we're now gonna go right here. Okay, 2018 might be an opportunity to really speed up this cycle. This cycle exists, this better cycle exists and could exist in any election year. But 2018 is a year when people are particularly tuning in and more people are voting and more people who share our values are voting in down ballot elections. So it is a particularly important moment to think about this. Next. We have some great champions at the State House. This is a small sampling of people who are serving at the State House right now, who are terrific, who are being challenged from the right. So at the top, you have Janine Calkin. She's being challenged in a Democratic primary, but by a more conservative candidate. Over here, you have Teresa Tanzi, who many of you will know was the chief sponsor of the Good Gun Bill that passed last year, and has also been one of the prime voices calling out sexual harassment at the State House. She has a challenger, and some of the right-wing forces are already sending mailers in her district, right? At the bottom is Marcia Rangland Vassell, who just this week now has a new challenger in the Democratic primary, but more conservative on choice. And this is relatively new Senator Don Oyer from Newport, who has a Republican challenger. So pay close attention. A lot of the great work that lots of people in this room and others have done needs to be defended in 2018. And conservatives have noticed that progressives have won some elections in recent years, and they are mobilizing to try to fight back. So we have some defense to do this year. Next. There are some wonderful opportunities in open seats. This is just 2 of them. These are 2 WFP happens to have endorsed. There are others. This is Liana Kassar, who's running in the Barrington open seat, and Rebecca Kislak, who's running in the Providence open seat, which we might be in the middle of. There are many more open seats. Go to click the next one. Not all of them actually have fully formed fields yet. There's an open seat in Woonsocket, there's one in Lincoln, there's one in Scituate, there's one in Coventry, in West Warwick, and in South Providence. So there's lots of opportunities for new candidates to emerge here, and if you know somebody who's awesome, who lives in one of these places, let's talk, because there's just winning the seats that are available and open could really make a big difference in this legislative session. Next. We have some good opportunities in 2018 to challenge Republicans. That's not always the case in Rhode Island. There are not that many Republicans, and some of them are in districts that are really tough going for us. But here's just 2 examples. The photo that's sort of behind is Bridget Valverde, who's challenging Senator Mark G. And in front is Justine Caldwell, who's challenging Representative Giarrusso. Those are both places where progressives could win seats that are currently held by Republicans. And next, we should also think about challenging some Democrats who are out of step with our values as well. And there are some examples of this. There may well be more, but Justin hit the button. I think the best one that I can think of right now is Representative Aaron Regenberg is running against the much more conservative incumbent lieutenant governor, who's a Democrat, but who posed during sick days and other kinds of things. So this, to me, this is a great opportunity to contest for our values statewide and say, no, actually, Rhode Islanders are on our side when it comes to a lot of these issues. All right, next. There's no cool picture on this slide. Candidates have until the end of June to file, so we don't have a complete picture of who all is running where yet. You're gonna meet and hear from today a bunch of organizations that make endorsements. WFP is just one of them. Planned Parenthood, I think, is here, and Moms Demand Action, and Indivisible, and others. So pay attention to those groups that are engaged in this piece of the work to figure out who the good candidates are going forward. And Justin, go ahead for. I just also want to say, the kind of people who are in this room, who are willing to spend time on a beautiful weekend day doing a thing to advance a particular set of values, you are the most valuable resource that any campaign has. It's hard to read, but this is a chart of the relative value of different kinds of campaign tactics. The one that's big and tall is knocking on doors. The one that's half that height is phone calls, and then everything else is much, much smaller. So if you want to make a difference in a campaign, use your time on a weekend to knock on doors for one of these candidates. That's an incredibly valuable investment any of you could make. And pick one or two or three places this year where you think the person who's running would be a great addition to the legislature, and spend some time there this summer. That will make an enormous difference and create a legislature that better represents our values and that sees them as more important. Okay, I think that's it. Does anyone have any questions? I'll do my best. Right here in the middle. So.
I live in Woonsocket, and I wondered where I would go to find out who might be running in the primaries that are coming up in that area. I'm not really happy with representatives from Woonsocket.
So I don't know that there's a place you can figure out who might be running. You need to talk to people about that, and you may need to encourage someone to run if you don't like the options that are there already. There's at least one open seat in Woonsocket. One of the senators isn't running for re-election. Cody's not running for re-election. Yeah, but so I would start asking around, because there is still time, especially in those open seats, for people to come forward and stand up and decide to run. I don't know the answer to your question. That's the thing. It's people decide to run by talking to their friends. There's not a central registry of people who are thinking about it. That would make my job way easier.
You mentioned a lot of good people and showed us pictures, and I didn't write down what you said. Does your organization have a website of the people you've endorsed? How do we keep track of those folks so you can vote?
Yeah, we have a website that has them on there, and so will a lot of the other groups who make endorsements. So the Planned Parenthoods, the Young Democrats, the moms have all of those. But yeah, sure, working families. We just did our first few endorsements. We'll do more as the filing deadline gets closer and the summer progresses. Yeah. Jesse.
Just to get over, some people have discomfort with going door to door. I'm one of them, but I understand that it's effective. To just ask the obvious, why is it so effective? That should help.
Yeah, that's actually a great question. Two really important reasons why it's effective. One is when you're talking to somebody at the door, you're not just showing up there and being hey, candidate, right? You're saying something about that candidate and why you should support them. You're delivering that candidate's core message. And it makes a certain amount of sense, right? You can deliver a message in a lot of ways. You can do a TV ad, you can send a piece of mail, but delivering it face to face by a real human being is more persuasive. So that's what this evidence shows, that you know, even with the same message, delivering a message face-to-face is more persuasive. The other thing that's better about knocking on doors and phone calls too, although fewer and fewer people answer their phones, is that you get to ask people, can I count on your vote? And then you know who should you not bother with because they're not supporting you, who should you go back to and make sure that they remember. Because the primary this year, guys, it's on a Wednesday, so people are definitely going to need reminding. And who do you need to like do some more work persuading? So those are the two reasons why door-to-door is much more responsive than other ways of campaigning, and it just is a more persuasive way to deliver a message.
When is the primary?
It's the 12th, yes, the 12th was the Wednesday, yes.
12th of September.
September. Right, so we have all summer. This is why we're having this conversation now, is these races that are primaries, the time to do work on them is really over the summer because there's like a tiny, tiny little slice of fall before that primary happens.
Can you say about how much it costs to run a campaign in Rhode Island?
It varies a lot by where you are, but it's not actually an enormous amount of money. Like last year in 2016, we worked with some folks who won elections who like raised and spent less than $10,000. I think many of these races you're going to want to raise and spend more like 20 or 30, but it's an amount of money that people raise from their friends and family and like other activists. They raise a lot of it in like $50 and $100 contributions. So if you don't like knocking on doors, write a check. And if you do like knocking on doors, maybe write a check anyway, and try to do both. But that's another really important way to help campaigns, because it's not like these campaigns are getting giant. The contribution limit is $1,000. There's not like money pouring in from elsewhere. These campaigns are really funded by individuals. Yes?
Maybe you can talk a little bit about the software that's available that makes door-to-door canvassing less painful than it used to be. That
Yeah.
You're mostly approaching people you think might be supporters.
Yeah, so most campaigns these days are using something called VAN, or Vote Builder is a name for the same thing, which is a software that allows you to like see a really nice map of the people whose doors you're knocking on and like enter the information right in. Yeah, even in the days when we were doing this all on paper, you're not knocking on every single person's door. You're picking out doors of people who we think might vote in a primary election in September, if it's a primary election, or might vote and might support a progressive candidate in a general election in November if it's a general election. So yeah, I mean, not to say that you won't encounter some jerks in the world out there knocking on doors. That certainly happens, but mostly people are actually pretty happy to like be asked about what they think about politics in their communities. And it's definitely like a thing that requires a little bit of screwing up of courage. I've done it every year for more than a decade, and it still requires that for me a little bit. But it's pretty fun too, and you meet some interesting people and have some interesting conversations.